In late 2023, Swift Money conducted a survey of how property management professionals were using technology in their day-to-day jobs. One of those questions was about how many different tools they used. Most used more than 10 tools. Many used up to 20, and some used over 30 different tools in the course of doing their job. 30 tools. Imagine that. What that actually means for those companies is that they spent more time training people on how to navigate software than they did on how to be great property managers. The actual work, the resident relations, maintenance coordination, and communicating with the owners get lost in a sea of tab switching and data entry. When I arrived at North Point, we had 14 different tools in use. Today, I'm going to tell you why we're collapsing those down into essentially one and what we're giving up to do it. This is year one, documenting the transformation of a national SFR operator in real time. I'm Stephen Ray, Chief Innovation Officer at North Point Asset Management. Last episode, I told you what I walked into: fragmented tools, missing documentation, tribal knowledge, and a leasing pipeline tracked in Google Sheets. Today, the consolidation decision, why we are going all in on AppFolio, what we're sunsetting, what we're keeping, and the trade-offs we're making. Now, I want to be clear about something right up front. I'm going to discuss several tools today and the choices that we made. But what I'm sharing really is a case study in how to think about your tech stack when almost everything needs to change. The framework matters more than the specific vendor. So let's get into it. So before I walk you through what we're changing, I want to explain why consolidation became the driving principle. Let's quickly go back to that survey from Swift Money. 10, 20, 30 tools. Think about what that actually means for the people using them. Every tool has its own login, its own interface, its own logic for how things work. Might have its own mobile app. It has its own notification system flooding your inbox. It has its own way of naming things, organizing things, and displaying things. And now multiply that times the number of tools that you're using. And you start to understand the real cost of a fragmented tech stack. It's not the subscription fees. Those add up, but they're not what kills you. What kills you is cognitive load. When your maintenance coordinator has to check one system for work orders, then flip to another to see lease status, then open a spreadsheet to update the turn tracker, and then log into another platform to request a bid or order supplies, they're not thinking about the resident's problem. They're thinking about which tab to click next. The mental energy that should be going towards judgment, problem solving, and resident services gets burned on software navigation instead. And here's the thing about cognitive load. It's invisible. You can't see it on a P&L. You can't track it in a dashboard, but it shows up everywhere. In errors, in delays, in inconsistent execution, or in that glazed look on someone's face when you ask them to pull a report. Now, I could hear some people watching this who might say, but my tools are integrated. Data flows between them automatically. And yes, integrations help. They reduce some friction, but they don't eliminate the problem. They also don't fully solve it. So let's start with the people side. Your team still has to learn 8 interfaces. Your training still has to cover 8 systems. Your new hire still has to build muscle memory in 8 different places. And when something breaks, and integrations do break, you're troubleshooting across multiple vendors, multiple support teams, multiple points of failure. And then here's what people aren't talking about enough on the data side. Integration means shared visibility, not shared data. You can see information across systems, but you don't have a single normalized database. The data still lives in different structures, different formats, and different logic. And that matters more now than it ever has. We're entering an era of agentic AI tools, systems that can take action on your behalf, not just answer questions. When those tools have to reach across multiple systems to do their work, you're adding latency, increasing cost, and adding complexity to every single deployment. And the time to launch goes up. the impact those tools can have goes down. If you want AI to actually transform how you operate, not just to sit on top of your existing mess, consolidation is not a nice to have. It's foundational. Now, I learned this lesson very early in my career, though I didn't necessarily have the language to enunciate it and explain it at the time. I was at Roscoe Properties, which later became RPM Living, and I had a mentor named Angelique Goodenough. We were a Yardy shop, and she insisted that we stay as deep as possible within that system. One platform, one interface, one place where teammates lived all day. I spent hours, honestly, probably hundreds of hours, over the course of years, customizing dashboards, building workflows, and making sure everything our teams needed was accessible without switching tools. At the time, it kind of felt like grunt work, just making the software do what it already should do. But as we scaled from 400 units to 16,000, that decision paid off in ways I didn't fully appreciate until later. Training was simpler. You're teaching one system, not 8. Onboarding was faster. New hires got productive in weeks, not months. Performance was more consistent because everyone was working the same way in the same place with the same information. And critically, we could actually manage performance. When everything lives in one system, you can see what's happening. You can measure it. You can identify where people need support, where processes are breaking down, where the bottlenecks are. Performance management becomes possible because you finally have visibility. And the compounding effects of this were very, very real. When you add a new process or a new report, you're adding it to a system people already know. You're not asking them to learn another tool on top of everything else that they're trying to do, because this job is hard. It's not easy to be a property manager, and we forget that sometimes. So that lesson stuck with me. And when I arrived at North Point and found more than 14 disconnected tools, I knew exactly what I didn't want to recreate. So let me paint the picture of what we were actually dealing with here at North Point. AppFolio was technically our property management system. It was the system of record, but functionally, it was almost an afterthought. The leasing pipeline lived in Google Sheets. Maintenance coordination happened in PropertyMeld. Inspections were in zInspector. Vendor bids went through Contractor Plus. Screening happened in Findigs. Leases got signed in DocuSign. Financials ran through QuickBooks. Phone systems were in GoToConnect. And then there was a reporting layer in Power BI trying to make sense of all of it. You following or confused yet? Exactly. And here's the thing. I don't want to make this sound like incompetence, because it wasn't. Our IT team had done heroic work trying to hold all of this together. They built a custom data repository with a semantic layer. They created APIs to aggregate information across all of these systems into something that was actually usable. They were essentially building middleware to make disconnected tools talk to each other. But that's exactly the problem. When you need a custom data infrastructure just to know what's happening in your own portfolio, something has gone horribly wrong. And the maintenance burden was very real. Every integration was a potential failure point. Every API is something that can break when a vendor updates their system. The IT team was spending a significant amount of time just keeping the plumbing working. At that time, that could have gone towards actually improving operations. And then Google Sheets was the connective tissue holding everything together. If you wanted to know the status of a lease, you checked the sheet. If you wanted to track turns, you checked a different sheet. And if you wanted to see the leasing pipeline, I think at this point, you get it. We were paying for a modern property management system and using it like it was a filing cabinet. The actual work happened elsewhere. And here's what that meant for performance management. We just couldn't do it. Not really. Not when your data lives in 15 different places. You can't actually see how your team is performing. You can't identify who needs coaching. You can't spot process breakdowns until they've already caused damage because you're flying blind. Now, you might be thinking, okay, the tech stack was messy, but messy tech stacks are everywhere. Why not just clean it up incrementally? Why the wholesale consolidation? Well, there's 2 big reasons. First, we didn't just have a technology problem. We had a process problem. Remember from the last episode, no SOPs, no formal training, tribal knowledge everywhere. The Google Sheets weren't just tracking work, they were actually defining how work got done. The process lived in the spreadsheets, which meant if we were going to rebuild our processes anyway, and we might as well rebuild them in the right place. If you have to reconstruct the foundation, you don't do it with the same broken materials. Second, and this was the forcing function, we had specific operational problems that the fragmented stack was making worse. I'll give you a couple examples. One, owner fund holds. When a maintenance invoice comes in, an SFR, sometimes you need to retain funds from an owner's account to cover it. With maintenance in one system and financials in another, that process was extremely manual and error prone. Money was getting dispersed that should have been held, or holds were being placed incorrectly. That system friction was creating real issues for us operationally. And then another example, owner communication and reporting. And this one's really kind of important to me more than probably anything else. When your maintenance data lives in one system, your financial data is in another, your leasing data is in a third, creating a coherent owner report is an exercise in data aggregation, and that time spent aggregating the data is time you're not spent thinking strategically about how to improve performance for that owner. Every report required pulling in from multiple sources, reconciling discrepancies, and hoping nothing got lost in translation. These weren't theoretical problems. They were hitting our P&L and damaging our client relationships. Then the kind of last domino to fall in this whole decision was in mid-October of 2025, about 2 weeks after I started, I attended AppFolio's customer conference. And this was a turning point. Now, I'll be honest, I went in skeptical. I'd used AppFolio at previous companies, and I knew its limitations. I assumed we need to keep several of our specialized tools because AppFolio wouldn't necessarily have feature parity. But the conversations I had there with product leadership and more importantly with other operators shifted my thinking. I learned about features I didn't know existed. I saw the roadmap and where they were headed. I talked to people who were using the platform far more deeply than we were. And I realized we were actually probably using about 20% of AppFolio. While spending money on tools to fill gaps that in reality, if we had done a better job of our implementation, AppFolio could already fill. The decision crystallized. Let's get as deep as we can with what we have, and then add tools only for genuine gaps that our property management software can't fill. And what actually probably surprised me the most is how much we ended up being able to consolidate. I expected to keep more tools than we're keeping. But once you commit to the consolidation principle, you find ways to make it work. And once you understand the trade-offs, it makes that decision-making process a lot easier. All right, it's time to walk you through the tools we're moving away from. And I want to be sure to set the right frame here. These are excellent products. Some are genuinely best in class at what they do. I have a relationship with people at several of these companies, and I have real respect for what they've built. This isn't a story about bad tools. It's a story about strategic fit. When you're consolidating to reduce cognitive load and integration complexity, you're making a specific trade-off. You're choosing breadth over depth. You're saying, I'd rather have 80% of the functionality in one place than 100% of the functionality spread across 8, 9, 10 places. That's the right call for us, given where Northpoint is and what we're trying to build as a company. But it might not be the right call for everyone. So here's what that looks like in practice. First big one was PropertyMeld AppFolio for maintenance. This was the most significant transition that we've made, and frankly, we're still right in the middle of it. Now, PropertyMeld is a genuinely excellent maintenance platform. I spoke with their CEO recently, and the depth of what they built is truly impressive. 10 years of maintenance data, AI that predicts costs before dispatch, analytics that should show you technician utilization and NOI impact down to the door. For operators running maintenance teams at scale and looking to optimize, it is without a doubt probably best in class. So why are we moving away from it? It comes down to objectives and capabilities. Right now, our goal is simple: deliver timely, effective maintenance to our residents at the best cost for our owners. That's it. That starts with process, how we organize, assign, and route work in the real world. What goes to vendors, what stays with us. Building a decision-making framework for the team. and developing a shared judgment on how to approach property maintenance. We're not at the stage of optimizing maintenance for the benefit of North Point. We're optimizing for residents and owners first. And here's something operators don't talk about enough. The skill set of your team has to match the tools that you give them. Our maintenance coordinators are great at maintenance, but they're not data scientists. When you hand someone a dashboard full of vendor performance metrics, scheduling efficiency scores, and utilization analytics, they need to know what to do with it. What decisions does this inform? What actions do I actually take? And without that training, without that context, sophisticated analytics become noise. Or worse, they create analysis paralysis and get in the way of doing the actual work. A tool is only as useful as a skilled hand that wields it. Most operators assume that the tool will do the work on its own. It won't. The tool amplifies whatever capability already exists. And if your team doesn't know how to interpret and act on the data just doesn't help. There's also the practical reality. PropertyMeld costs us a significant amount of money each year on top of our other systems. And for that to make sense, you need a team equipped to extract the value of those advanced capabilities. And we're just not there yet. Right now, that money is better invested in the basics, training, documentation, and process design. And that's the trade-off. We're giving up best-in-class maintenance, analytics, in exchange for simplicity and focus on the basics. And for where we are right now, that's the right call. Now, the next one I spoke about a bit in the last episode. Moving from Google Sheets to AppFolio, plus probably some sort of project management tool like ClickUp. The transition is less about replacing a product and more about moving from unstructured to structured work. Spreadsheets aren't a tool problem. They're a process problem. When your leasing pipeline like ours lived in Google Sheets, it's usually because you don't have a defined process that fits neatly into a purpose-built software. The flexibility of spreadsheets becomes an actual crutch. And that flexibility has real costs. We had no visibility into pipeline performance. How many leads came in last week? What's our conversion rate from tour to application? Where are things getting stuck? Those questions required someone to manually audit the sheet, which means they actually rarely got answered. We couldn't see where help was needed. If one market was drowning in leads and another was dead, we wouldn't know until someone raised their hand, or worse, until we saw the vacancy numbers. And the error potential was enormous. One mistyped entry, one formula that got accidentally deleted, one person who forgot to update their row. The data integrity issues meant we couldn't trust reports even when we generated them. And here's the real cost. We had no performance management. When you're like us, if your leasing data is living in spreadsheets, you can't coach your team effectively. You can't identify who's converting leads and who's struggling. You can't see if the problem is lead volume or lead quality or follow-up timing. You're just looking at outcomes, vacancy numbers, without any insight into the actual process that created them. So what we're losing is flexibility, because a spreadsheet can do anything. You need a new field, add a column. You need a new view, create a new tab. That flexibility is genuinely useful, especially when you're figuring things out. But for us, we need structure a lot more than we need flexibility right now. We are trading optionality for reliability and for the ability to actually manage performance. And that's the right trade for us at this stage of our transformation. Now, the other big switch we made was from Findigs to AppFolio for screening. And Findigs also is a great product. It's a smart screening product with some genuinely innovative features. Their dynamic screening criteria, where you could automatically adjust qualifying requirements based on what the system is seeing in terms of applicants, is a really smart solution for hard to lease properties and for multi-family operators who might have units or things that are struggling. It's a great tool. I genuinely am very impressed with it. However, for us, the issue was friction in the applicant journey. Prospects would start on an ILS site. They'd see a listing. They'd inquire. They'd communicate with our team. And then when it came time to apply, we'd send them a separate application outside of our flow. Then they'd apply. Different interface, different experience, different login. Every handoff that you have between systems And actually, people who build websites, especially e-commerce and those sorts of things, or anyone who talks to your website company who has your property website, if you're in multifamily, every time you have a pop-up or get redirected to another screen, you lose people. And some people don't complete that actual transition. And in a very competitive leasing environment, that friction has real cost. Additionally, there was a very specific integration gap that we were missing. In SFR, Zillow is our bread and butter for where we do most of our leasing. And we were not able to use the Zillow renter profiles for people to be able to apply at our properties. And a lot of renters now are using these pre-verified profiles with their screening information already attached. They want to use them. It saves them time and hassle, and we couldn't use them. With AppFolio and having their screening and using their application process, we have that integration. So we're giving up the dynamic criteria feature. We're giving up all the data that Findigs has that could be provide insights to us on our process. But honestly, for single family rentals, that it doesn't feel like the value prop was necessarily there for us. And for me personally, the seamless prospect to resident journey in one system is worth more to us than any other feature that might be out there for us to use. All right, let me handle this next set a little bit more briefly because the trade-offs are less significant. We were using zInspector for inspections, and it's a really great inspection product. They have a very cool AI feature that converts video walkthroughs into still images with all of your notes, and that's genuinely useful for documenting properties quickly. But with AppFolio, they have a native inspection capability now that meets our needs, and results can be pushed to residents and to owners very quickly in the same system, and we get that whole historical reference of what's been done on that unit or that property previously. Plus, with the Realm X flows from AppFolio, we can trigger inspections automatically. For us, one fewer system outweighs the video to image feature. We were using Contractor Plus to handle vendor bid management. It's a good product for what it does, but it wasn't being used consistently by our teams, which tells you something about fit. When a tool requires active effort and people aren't using it, the problem usually isn't the tool, it's how it fits into your natural workflows. And moving this into AppFolio really simplified things. We were also using DocuSign for all of our lease signatures. It's a great product. It's DocuSign. Everyone knows DocuSign. But for us, most of our signatures are lease execution. And the native AppFolio e-signature capability handles it cleanly without the export, sign, import dance that was slowing us down. We lose DocuSign's broader capabilities, but that's a small percentage of our signature volume that even needed those. And then lastly, we were using QuickBooks for accounting, like most small businesses and a lot of millions of businesses all over the world. The issue for us was the disconnect from operations that existed with our accounting software. Every financial event had to be entered twice or synced through integrations. And for property management specifically, where financials are tightly coupled to operational events like move-ins, move-outs, and maintenance, having accounting in the same system as operations reduces a ton of friction for us. And it unlocked us being able to use a ton of automations within AppFolio for their corporate accounting. So that trade-off also made a lot of sense. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, you're consolidating everything to AppFolio, so why are you keeping ClickUp? That's a fair question, so let me explain. First, a clarification. ClickUp isn't surviving the cut. We're actually implementing it new. ClickUp solves a specific problem that AppFolio doesn't address today: cross-team work coordination and true project and task management. So here's a scenario at North Point. We have market teams, people in Kansas City, Dallas, Charlotte, distributed across the country. We have centralized teams, leasing, maintenance coordinators, accounting, working from our offices or remotely. And then we have offshore teammates handling certain support functions. These teams have to be able to work together asynchronously. A market team needs something from the centralized accounting team. A centralized leasing person needs information from a local agent. And an offshore team member might need to hand off work to someone in a completely different time zone. So where does that coordination happen? Email is the default answer, and email is terrible for this. Here's why. Email notifications kill focus and productivity. One of the worst things that you can do for yourself and your effectiveness at work is to work out of your inbox. Every time an email comes in, it demands attention. Was that the thing I was waiting for? Should I respond now? It becomes almost Pavlovian. Your team ends up as slaves to their inbox, constantly context switching, and that kills focus and productivity. With ClickUp, communication happens on the task itself. The context stays with the work. You can see the full history without digging through email threads. You can prioritize and batch your work instead of reacting to every single notification. For scattered site operations with distributed and offshore teams, this kind of work management is really essential. AppFolio is incredible at managing property data, resident data, owner data, but it's not yet built for really intense work management and cross-team coordination. And we also do a lot in the company that isn't necessarily just related to the property management, right? We're still also running a business, and we need something to help us do that as well. So the principle holds. Consolidate where you can, add purpose-built tools for only genuine gaps. And ClickUp fills a genuine gap for us. It's not duplicating what AppFolio does, it's handling what AppFolio doesn't do. Now, I'll be honest, ClickUp has not been universally embraced internally. Our COO, who's a good friend of mine, prefers G Suite. Some of our team finds ClickUp's interface overwhelming, like it's trying to do too much. And something I've noticed within that is that the objections usually come before the learning, not after. The burden is on me and our team to train people on how to use these tools properly, because people will look at an unfamiliar interface, feel the discomfort of not knowing where things are, and conclude that the tool is actually the problem. But that's not a tool problem. That's a change problem. The same resistance happens with any new system. People prefer what they know, even when what they know doesn't scale. I like the human follow-up works when you're coordinating 3 people in the same office. It breaks when you've got distributed teams across time zones who need asynchronous handoffs. And this is the hard part of transformation that doesn't get talked about enough. You can pick the right tool and still face resistance, not because the tool is wrong, but because change is uncomfortable, and discomfort gets rationalized as a criticism of the tool. So we're still working through this. I'm not going to pretend we have full alignment or that it's working perfectly or as I would like it to, but the principle holds. The tool that enables coordination at scale beats the tool that feels familiar but doesn't. All right, so I want to take a minute and be very direct about the risks of this strategy, because there are very real risks. First, there's a lock-in risk. When you consolidate to one platform, your switching costs go up dramatically. If AppFolio raises prices significantly, or their product falls behind, or a clearly superior alternative emerges, we're less able to move. Our data, all our workflows, our training, our integrations, they're all tied to one platform. That's a very real risk, and I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. We're accepting increased dependency in exchange for integration benefits. And that's a trade I'm comfortable with, but it is a trade. Then there's an innovation risk. What if AppFolio falls behind on AI and automations? What if a competitor leapfrogs them? We're betting that their product direction aligns with where operations need to go. Here's why I'm comfortable with that bet. The conversations I've had with their product team suggest they're thinking about this the right way, and I've had conversations at the Future Conference, as I mentioned, about their roadmap. And after 20 months personally of focused AI research before joining Northpoint, I have opinions about what good AI implementation actually looks like in property management, and their approach aligns with mine. But it is still a bet, and I'm not naive about that. Then we also have exposure and a risk when it comes to integration constraints. We're using AppFolio's stack integrations for external tools where we need them, for things like utility billing. Stack integrations are easier to implement than rolling your own integrations, but they also limit our options somewhat. We're constrained to vendors in the Stack ecosystem, which is smaller than the universe of all possible integrations. And again, that's a trade. Ease of integration versus vendor optionality. We're choosing ease because integration maintenance has a real cost. But the honest take is this. We're making a bet. We believe the benefits of consolidation Reduced cognitive load, simpler training, faster onboarding, better data integrity, and lower maintenance burden outweigh the risks of vendor dependency. But it is a bet. So if you're an operator considering something similar, go in with your eyes open about what you're trading away. All right, let me tell you where we are in this process as this episode airs. Things that are completed. Screening and applications have fully transitioned into AppFolio. Lease generation is now streamlined through their native workflow. And we have real visibility into the leasing pipeline at Northpoint for what's maybe the first time. We have a lot still in progress. PropertyMeld transitions underway. We're migrating maintenance operations into AppFolio. We're piloting AppFolio's leasing CRM, and we're about to kick off the pilot of their leasing performer AI agent functionality. We are experimenting with using AppFolio activities for task assignment between market and centralized teams as a way to maybe not have to use ClickUp and be able to keep everything truly in AppFolio. We'll have more on that probably to come in a future episode. We've launched what we're calling Nexus, our documentation system that has initial SOPs and work instructions in place with lots more to build out. We're actively gathering teammate feedback on the documentation, and we've deployed 3 custom GPTs, one for marketing description generation, one for comp research, and one for financial analysis, with a lot more to come. And then still ahead of us, and there's a lot still ahead of us, we have more Realm X flows to build and integrate. We have a lot more training documentation to build, create, and push out to our teammates, and we still have the full meld migration to complete. It's not done. We are right in the middle of it, which is exactly what this podcast is meant to be about. Documenting the transformation in progress, not presenting a polished case study after the fact where we just pretend like it was easy, because it's not. So we've made those changes. How is that affecting our business? What are we seeing so far? Well, the wins, I already mentioned, we have reporting on our leasing pipeline that we've literally never had before. I can see conversion rates, pipeline velocity, and where the process is getting stuck. That visibility is already informing decisions and improving our operations. Teams are slowly starting to transition mentally to operating from one system, and the cognitive load reduction is real, though it takes time to fully realize because people have years of muscle memory in the old system. And that leads to what is probably the biggest challenge that we're currently facing, that we're going to face for the next few months: change fatigue. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We're asking an awful lot of our team. The scale of changes happening in parallel is really significant. New processes, new tools, new documentations, new expectations, all at once. That's intentional because we believe that doing this quickly is better long-term than prolonging the pain over a year or longer of making these changes slowly. But it has costs. Some teammates are experiencing fatigue. The learning curve is very real, especially for people who had developed real expertise in the tools that we are now moving away from. So here's how we're trying to address it. Although I'll say this is also somewhere where I'm and our team are still looking to improve and get better. We're doing our best to communicate changes ahead of time. So there are no surprises. When something is changing, teams know it's coming and they know why. We're supporting that transition actively. We're not just announcing changes and walking away. We're trying to provide training, office hours, quick reference guides, and find ways to engage with them where they're doing the work and the flow of their actual jobs. And then we're involving teammates in feedback loops. The documentation they're using, we're asking them what works and what doesn't. That input will directly shape what we build and directly influence the processes that we're designing. And most importantly, we're acknowledging the difficulty, not pretending that this is easy, not dismissing frustrations. We're recognizing that change is hard, even when it's done right. I'm confident consolidation is the right move, without question, but doing it quickly has costs. So we're trying to balance speed and sustainability, and we're stubbing our toe here and there, and that's going to happen. But as long as we continue to move forward, I'm confident that we're going to end up in the right place where we need to be for our owners, our residents, and for our team. So let me leave you with something practical. If you're an operator evaluating your own tech stack, here's my approach. First, count your tools. Seriously, make a list. See how many systems your team touches in a typical week. You might be surprised. And include everything: the PMS, the maintenance tool, the screening service, the inspection app, your word processor, any sort of spreadsheets or tools that you're using there, all the reporting dashboards, everything. And if that number is north of 10, then you might have a problem. If it's 15, 20, or more, it's definitely worth taking a closer look. Next, map the handoffs. Every time data moves between systems or between people is a potential failure point. Every handoff requires someone to manually transfer information, an integration to work, or a process to ensure that nothing gets lost. And draw it out. If this were for leasing, where does a lead start? How does it become an application? How does that application become a lease? How does that lease become a move-in? Every arrow between systems is a place where things can break. 3, audit your PMS utilization. Now, this one can sometimes be uncomfortable, but look at what your system can actually do, and then look at what you're actually using. Many operators are using maybe 30% of the capabilities of their core property management system, while paying for separate tools to handle things that that system could already do. Now, sometimes there's a good reason. That specialized tool is really just significantly better for your needs. But often the reason is just that's how we've always done it. Next, calculate the real cost. And this is not just subscriptions, though you should actually add those up too. Calculate the training time to onboard someone into 8 systems versus 2. Calculate the error rates from manual data transfers. And calculate the cognitive load tax on your team and the cost to their focus and judgment. Now, these costs are real. They just don't show up as line items on a P&L. 5, ask, can you actually manage performance? And this is the question that should cut through all of the noise. With your current tech stack, can you see how your team is performing? Can you identify who needs support? And can you spot process breakdowns before they become outcome problems? If the answer is no, if you're only seeing lagging indicators like vacancy rates and delinquency after the damage has been done, your tech stack might be getting in the way of your ability to lead. 6, ask yourself, what's the minimum viable stack? If you were starting from scratch, what would you actually need? What is the least number of tools you would have to implement? It's going to be a core PMS, plus what genuine gaps can that PMS not fill? 7, accept that there will be trade-offs. You're not going to get best-in-class everything. And sometimes specialized tools are better than their PMS equivalents. Sometimes they're significantly better, but you have to decide when that gap matters enough to justify the integration cost, the training cost, and the cognitive load cost. For many operators, their answer is going to be different than ours. If PropertyMeld or Findigs or any other specialized tool is working well for you, don't blow it up just because we did. But if you're finding that your team spend more time learning and trying to figure out how to navigate software versus doing the actual work, or if you can't see how your people are performing, then consolidation might be something that's worth considering. Your goal isn't the best tools. That's important to keep in mind. It's not the best tools. Your goal is the best outcomes. And sometimes that means fewer, simpler tools used more deeply. So here's where we are at Northpoint. We're consolidating from 14 systems down to essentially AppFolio as the core operating system, ClickUp for work management, and a few other purpose-built integrations for genuine gaps. We're betting that the cognitive load reduction, the training simplification, and the data integrity benefits will outweigh the risks of platform dependency and some of the features that we're giving up not having necessarily the state-of-the-art for every single thing that we're trying to do. And critically, we're betting that consolidation gives us something that we didn't actually have before, the ability to better manage performance. to see what's happening, to support our teams, and most importantly, to continue to improve. And we're in the midst of it. Some transitions are complete, some are in progress, and some are still ahead of us. And we're learning as we go, which is exactly what this podcast is for. So next time, first principles for operator technology. That episode lays out the thesis underneath everything we're building. Why process comes before technology, why AI won't save a broken system, why most operators get the sequence backwards and they pay for it later. It's the intellectual framework guiding every decision that we're making, including the consolidation decision I walked you through today. That's episode 3, dropping February 9th. And until then, if you're evaluating your own tech stack, start with the count. How many tools do you have? That number alone might tell you something. That's all I got for today. Appreciate everyone. Thanks for listening.